Tonight, student arrested. A high school in Fort St. John placed under lockdown. Lawsuit filed. Elders look for a judicial review of the Blueberry River First Nation. And closures. The province restricts areas for snowmobilers. Well, good evening and thank you very much for joining us. And we begin tonight with a Fort St. John High School placed on lockdown for most of the morning after the RCMP received word of a student with a gun. Now, while the student wasn't at school, threat-related behavior prompting safety concerns among staff, students, and parents. Now, here was the scene outside of North Peace Secondary School this morning on 86th Street, just before students were called back to class. You can see an officer with a gun drawn as students group outside. In a social media post, the school's principal assuring parents that all students and staff were safe. RCMP say shortly before 9:30 this morning, they received a report of a youth in possession of a firearm and his location was unknown. Now, Mounties confirmed while he was a student, he did not attend school today. The youth was later arrested at a different location without incident, according to police. The lockdown solely out of an abundance of caution, according to the RCMP. Schools in the surrounding areas, including Dr. Kearney Middle School, were also placed in a hold and secure modes. The police say the investigation is ongoing and more information may be released as it becomes available. Well, Blueberry River First Nation elders Clarence and Joe Absassin have filed a motion calling for a judicial review of the Blueberry River Band Council. A statement of fact filed by Edward Absassin's family and elders group was obtained by CJDC. It calls for a review of the decision-making process. Now, they allege, quote, a flagrant disregard for the nation's laws and customs. They claim the investigation against former Chief Judy Desjardins was conducted without consultation and it lacks supporting documentation. And they also allege important decisions on the implementation agreement and the firing of their band manager were made behind closed doors. Now, they're referencing a similar 2021 case called the Gauthier decision, where Councillor Shelley Gauthier and Troy Wolf applied for a review. At the time, they said the leadership failed to observe bylaws and hold regular council meetings. The court decided then that meetings be held at least twice a month. The elders now accuse those councillors of governing with the same disregard. No, none of the accusations have been tested in court. They're asking the federal court to declare that council's actions breached the nation's laws and customs. Among other requests, they seek declarations for regular council meetings and conflict of interest in the Desjardins investigation. They also want more consultation with members before major decisions, mediation with elders on governance, and costs related to the review. Well, the emergency room at the Chetwynd Hospital on diversion once again today. And once again, the health authority taking to social media to let residents know that the emergency room at the hospital was closing Tuesday. They posted the notice just before noon, but failed to say when the diversion started. The emergency is expected to reopen tonight at 10 p.m. Staffing shortages over the last 4 years continue to plague the hospital, and now Northern Health no longer willing to inform the public whether it's a nursing or physician shortages to blame. People needing life-saving care are being asked to call 911 before being transported to the next closest ER that's over an hour away. Well, CJDC-TV News asked Northern Health about the issue of liability should someone need life-saving care and die on their way to another hospital. Lisa Zanetta said she couldn't answer the question directly, instead saying they try and get people to a hospital within an hour. Well, several areas of the South Peace have been affected by snowmobile closures. Backcountry enthusiasts are calling on the provincial government to restore access quickly.
Permits expired. It was an administrative fault on the part of the government, and what has happened is it's restricted access to those areas from snowmobilers, and there will be myself and two other MLAs from the opposition party. We'll be having a meeting with the minister responsible next week.
The permits are issued by the province for access to Crown land. Neufeld says he believes they expire due to last fall's provincial election. The snowmobilers are concerned that if the province doesn't fix the situation soon, the entire season could be lost. CJDC-TV reached out to the province for comment. The Ministry of Forests got back to us saying they weren't aware of the closures. Well, some good news tonight. A strike has been averted at CN Rail. CN says it's reached a tentative agreement with its signal and communications worker. About 750 employees across Canada were poised to hit the picket lines today if a deal was not reached. 95% voted in favor of the agreement. The union says it was pushing for higher wages and better work-life balance. The tentative 4-year deal must still be ratified by members. A chaotic end to 2024 for Canada Post has some people calling for the corporation to consider privatization.
90% private, 10% public, maybe 80-20, something like that strikes me as a reasonable approach going forward.
Experts say privatizing Canada Post could result in a service that's more competitive and could prioritize customers' needs. Others warn of the potential lack of access to rural and remote communities across Canada and job losses. Calls for privatization are happening as the hearings into the state of Canada Post begin today in Ottawa. The Commission is looking into the financial situation, business model, and workplace practices of Canada Post. A report will be ready by May of this year. The Dutch man charged with the sextortion of BC teen Amanda Todd will serve his Canadian sentence in the Netherlands. The news comes after his bid to scrap the sentence was rejected by that country's Supreme Court. Aidan Coban was given a 13-year sentence here in BC Supreme Court, but that sentence was reduced to 6 years to align the punishment with Dutch law. He appealed, arguing he's already serving an 11-year Dutch sentence for the similar charges. The court disagreed and is upholding the Canadian term. Todd was 15 when she died by suicide in 2012 after posting a video about being tormented by an online harasser. Medical experts across the country are slamming Alberta's COVID-19 pandemic review that was paid for by the province. The doctor who spearheaded the review refused to be interviewed, but he did appear on a podcast saying there's no such thing as consensus in science. But an infectious disease expert disagrees with the report's findings.
It looks quite polished, but the findings in the report are very much at odds with every single legitimate piece of data that I've been following very closely over the course of the pandemic.
In 2022, Premier Danielle Smith ordered the health minister to create a panel to examine COVID-19 data. The group's final report was quietly released Friday, making many recommendations. The 269-page document cites weak evidence for mask wearing and potential harm for doing so, and it also recommends against using rapid antigen tests to direct containment. The report recommends stopping the use of the COVID-19 vaccine. Well, Dr. Saxinger disagrees and believes it should have not been made public. She says, given this report does not have that quality or caliber of information to it, well, she thinks it should be withdrawn. The long process to put fluoride back into Calgary's water supply is expected to finish soon. The city says work to install equipment at the water treatment plants should be complete by the end of March. Back in 2011, council voted to remove fluoride. 4 years ago in a plebiscite, 62% of Calgarians voted in favor of adding fluorine back. The cost to reintroduce fluoride is $28 million with an added annual cost of another $1 million. After fluoride was removed, 11% more kids in Calgary got cavities compared to kids in Edmonton. We learned the findings of a commission of inquiry into foreign interference today. Justice Marie-Josée Hoog saying there's no evidence of any traitors in Parliament and no list of culpable members of Parliament. But she did say there was problematic conduct. Judy Chin now on the message and the more than 50 recommendations that were made.
Our democratic institutions have remained robust.
In her final report, Justice Marie-Josée Hoog said there was no list of parliamentarians colluding with foreign states, contradicting an earlier national security report which revealed witting and semi-witting individuals.
Nor have I seen any evidence to suggest that there are currently so-called traitors in Parliament. While I saw evidence of some concerning behavior, the evidence does not show any MPs plotting with foreign states against Canada's interests.
But there were politicians who had problematic relationships with diplomats and officials who didn't sound the alarm sooner.
That's the overall theme of the report, that up until recently, everybody involved has grossly underestimated this problem and not done enough with information passing along and dealing with it.
Hoke's report puts forward 51 recommendations.
Improving the ability of parliamentarians to understand the threat. And she's talking about, let's create a guide for them, let's make sure they have proper training, let's make sure they get the intelligence that they need to have, let's make sure their staff are properly trained.
After investigating the 2019 Liberal nomination race in Don Valley North, where international students were bussed in to cast ballots, the commissioner recommended that parties limit voting to citizens and permanent residents in nomination races. The Liberals are doing this in their leadership contest, and the NDP says it will follow.
I've instructed my party, my national director and team to follow all of the recommendations as it relates to political parties.
The commissioner says she would like to see 24 of 51 recommendations implemented before the next election. That's unlikely, given the fact that all the opposition parties have said that they will vote no confidence on government bills when Parliament resumes at the end of March. Judy Trin, CTV News, Ottawa.
Well, Canada has signed a nuclear energy cooperation agreement with Poland.
This agreement is a win-win. It'll support good middle-class jobs in Canada, and it'll mean better access to nuclear energy for Poland, ensuring that you never again have to turn to Russian oil and gas, all while growing your economy with a clean source of power that will help you shift away from coal.
Prime Minister Trudeau signing the deal as he concluded his visit to Poland today. It'll allow Canadian companies to support Polish efforts to begin generating nuclear power. Poland expects to begin construction of its first nuclear reactors next year, with power being produced by 2033. And the federal government is planning a stimulus package to help Canadians and business if our country is hit with 25% tariffs from the United States. A White House spokesperson saying today those tariffs could apply as early as this Saturday. CTV's Michael Couture has more.
The amount of relief will depend on how big those tariffs are. Sources tell us no specific programs have been designed, but they could reach pandemic levels if President Trump follows through on his threat to impose 25% tariffs on all Canadian imports into the U.S.
It'll bring the industry to its knees.
A blunt assessment of the impact of U.S. tariffs from the head of a manufacturing company connected to the automotive sector. With deeply integrated supply chains, federal ministers continue to warn Americans will bear the brunt of the pain.
There cannot be tariffs without consequences. There cannot be tariffs without impact. And there cannot be tariffs with a higher cost for U.S. consumers.
If those warnings don't work, the federal government is preparing counter tariffs plus a stimulus package to help businesses and Canadians. Sources tell CTV News that plan does not need to launch as soon as tariffs are levied on Canadian products. Instead, it will address the economic impacts as they become apparent.
It's no different than the pandemic. It's not about one level of government. It's about all three levels of government working collaboratively.
Ford says the public and private sectors must work together to invest in infrastructure in the face of this threat.
We're going to see an unprecedented attack to our families, to our businesses, to our communities.
In an interview on Bloomberg's Big Take podcast, former Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister and current Liberal leadership contender Chrystia Freeland said Canada needs to publish a list of American products that we could slap with counter tariffs to get President Trump's attention.
I believe that he doesn't care that much if Canadian politicians are jumping around, banging our fists on the table, etc., but he cares about Americans.
Economists say the key for any type of stimulus package is to make it targeted and time-sensitive, to prevent it from becoming inflationary spending or to have it contribute to the deficit. Michael Couture, CTV News, Ottawa.
U.S. President Donald Trump has temporarily suspended all foreign aid for the next 90 days. Trump says it's pending a review to determine whether it aligns with his foreign policy goals. The total amount of assistance affected is still unclear. Funding for several programs have already been allocated by Congress and then is obligated to be spent. Trump also declared in the executive order signed Monday that any future foreign assistance will need to fully align with his foreign policy. The United States provides a significant amount of foreign aid, leaving humanitarian groups alarmed over what this could mean. Now, Trump also ordered a temporary pause on all federal grants and loans. The sweeping decision could disrupt a number of social programs. The money is on hold so Trump can review grants and loans to ensure they also align with his policies. The move could disrupt education and healthcare programs, housing assistance, and other initiatives that depend on federal funding. And Google is preparing to make changes to its maps amid Donald Trump's plans to rename the Gulf of Mexico. The tech giant says the change will be made when the name has officially been updated by government officials. American users will see the body of water as the Gulf of America. Mexican users will still see the Gulf of Mexico. Other countries will see both names. Trump is also changing the name of America's highest mountain peak back to Mount McKinley, and that'll be reflected on Google Maps as well. All right, please stay tuned. I'll be right back with weather, but as we head to break, here's a look at today's closing market numbers.